Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and I want to welcome you all to my channel Plants and Paints, where today we're going to be talking about the Ludisia Discolor. Now the Ludisia is a genus of orchid that only has one species and is most commonly referred to as a jewel orchid. This genus of orchid is actually native to China, Northeast India, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia and Burma. The Ludisia discolor is a terrestrial plant, and in its natural habitat it can be found growing on the forest floor. Now, unlike your more commonly known orchids, which are grown for their beautiful flower displays, the Ludisia discolor is more known for its foliage, which is often velvety in texture, a deep maroon color with pink, white or pinky orange stripes which run parallel to the center of the leaf. The name discolor actually means two colors, which is in reference to the two colors which you can find on the foliage. Like, I don't know if you can see it very clearly in the camera here, but you've got the dark maroon color that covers the majority of the leaf, and then you've got the, on my particular plant, it's like a mix between orange and pink, the like pinstripe appearance. Although not known for its flowers, I still believe that the Ludisia discolor actually produces a very nice flower spike with really pretty white and yellow flowers on there. I mean, mine's in flowering at the moment, so it's an ideal time to be able to show you. Although it is coming to the end of flowering, the flowers have started to die back. Now the Ludisia discolor actually stays in bloom for anything up to 2 months at the most, and unfortunately it only flowers once a year, and generally you're going to find that it flowers in January period, which is obviously when mine is flowering as well. So due to the fact that this plant comes from the orchid family, and unlike its cousins, it's not renowned for its flower production and is often overlooked. But it definitely has a more contemporary and obscure charm to it, and has gained some popularity due to the appeal it's had on the individuals who have chanced upon it, as it's not something you're generally going to find commonly in your average outlet. More to the point, you generally will only find them for sale in a commercial setting during the flowering period, as in such a setting the flower spike focuses the much needed attention to draw the eye to an easily overlooked little gem of a plant. So that is my general introduction into the plant. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the care and maintenance of it. So we'll start with lighting. So the Ludisia discolor in its natural environment is found growing on the ground of the forest where it's native to, and often in quite shaded locations. So what you want to do, you want to try and replicate that as much as possible in the environment you choose to keep it in at home. Ideally it's best suited to a north facing room, so it doesn't like bright direct sunlight, so definitely don't keep it in front of any south facing windows or anything that's getting very direct sunlight. Equally, as much as it doesn't like bright sunlight, it doesn't like dim lighting, so make sure to not stick it in a very shaded location. Now obviously if you're restricted with your windows and you don't actually have a north facing room, and the only space where you happen to keep your plants happens to be a south facing window, then what I would suggest is put it off to the side, so any light that's entering into the room has to bounce off the wall and then back towards the plant before it actually gets to the plant, which will provide more of a situation where it's less likely to be damaged from any intense lighting conditions. So main thing to remember with the lighting is that try and keep it in a northern exposure if possible. If not, just don't put it in any direct sunlight. Also, don't keep it in a dim lit area. It doesn't like to be in a dim situation as much as it doesn't like to be in any direct sunlight. So that's your general lighting conditions covered. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the potting mix. Now, unlike other orchids, you don't actually have to use an orchid potting mix for this. Now, after doing a lot of research online and looking at people's accounts of what they've used for their potting mixes, and I've generally just tried to keep this research with people who have kept their plants for a year plus. So I've not started with anybody who's generally kept them quite new. And some of the specimens that I was getting the information from, the pictures of the plants that they have, some of their plants were absolutely beautiful, really, really stunning. So as I was mentioning, you don't actually have to use a orchid potting mix for this, although you can. The only difference being is that compared to a normal everyday orchid, this generally is a little bit thirstier than those. So you are going to find in an orchid potting mix, you are going to water it a bit more frequently, which I'm sure some of you aren't going to mind. So it's not out of the equation to use that potting mix. But what I've actually found is a lot of people, they're using a mixture. So you can get away with using a general house potting soil for this, maybe mixed with a few stones in there just to make sure it's got some good drainage. But other than that, from reading the reviews that I've read online about people and how they've cared for their Ludicias, I found that generally they tend to keep about a 50% good quality, well draining potting soil, about 30% orchid bark, and about 20% perlite. So that would be a safe parameter to keep this plant in. The people who have actually been using those potting mixes have had some great success with their Ludicias. I mean, I am going to learn how to insert pictures and stuff onto the videos just so that I can show you some of these images that I'm talking about. But I really did see some really amazing looking Ludicias on there. So that would be your general potting mix, and what that will do, it will create a well draining potting mix, and it will also be able to hold moisture for you without the potting mix becoming soggy, because it doesn't like a soggy environment. I don't know many plants that actually do. So that is your potting mix covered there. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to watering. So the Ludisia Discolor likes an evenly moist potting mix and does not like to have a bone dry or soggy environment. Leaving the plant in an excessively wet environment will rapidly kill the plant. So make sure that when you're watering the plant, you're removing any runoff water. So you don't want the water to go back up into the pot and oversaturate the soil. So make sure that you're either watering it sparingly just to keep it evenly moist, so you create a regular watering regime, or when you're watering it, if you're watering it less frequently, just make sure that when you do water it, you remove any excess runoff water, as to not allow any excess water to go back up into the pot. When watering, I would suggest to use room temperature water. You don't want to use cold water. Cold water will shock the roots, and it can cause an amount of damage, but it would do things more like stunt growth of the plant. It would send it into shock. So during a growing season, this can be quite detrimental, because obviously you're focusing on the plant growing over that period of time, and the last thing you want is for it to go into like a dormancy state for, let's say, a period of a month to 6 weeks, because you've put cold water in there. So just make sure that your water is at room temperature. Also use filtered, bottled or rainwater. I use filtered water for all of my plants. Filtered water generally tends to be a more affordable option. You can pick up a water filter jug in like Asda, Argos, any of your stores where you go to buy your food from, generally they'll all sell them. I picked mine up for about £10, and the replacement filters, I buy them in packs of 2, and the pack of 2 costs £5, and each filter needs changing every 30 days. So to get the right kind of water in your plant is costing you £2.50 a month, whereas if you're buying bottled water, you're spending, you know, X amount on a regular basis. I go through, on average, including my humidifier and watering my plants, I'm probably going through about 16 pints of water a day, because my humidifier takes about 8 pints of water at a time, and I'm often topping it up in the morning and then filling it up again in the evening. And then on top of that, I've probably got maybe 50 or so plants in my house, and none of them are watered at the same time. So pretty much every day there's something, or every other day or every few days there's something that needs watering. So I do go through a fair bit of water. Also, I use the water in my spray bottle for misting the plants as well. So hence the reason I use so much of it, which, like I said, is on average probably about 16 pints a day, which, to be honest, can be a little bit of a pain, having to wait for the filter to filter the water to get through 16 pints, which can often take me about an hour in the evening to get through. So that's your watering. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on to humidity. So the humidity is not a huge factor as long as you are getting the watering requirements right. But if you're the kind of person that every now and then you're going to forget to water your plant, then it would be beneficial for the plant for you to place it in a humid environment so that it is able to take moisture out of the air. As I mentioned earlier, as much as it doesn't like to be in a soggy environment, it doesn't like to be left to get bone dry either. So if you're the kind of person to forget, just try and create an environment, or place it in an environment where there is more humidity available to it. You can do things to raise your humidity, such as, number one, obviously use a humidifier. You can buy relatively cheap ones on the internet, so Amazon, eBay. You can buy small tabletop ones, which, you know, cost anywhere from about £10 up, and you can get to the more slightly more expensive ones, or more specialist type of humidifiers. It depends on how many plants you need to raise the humidity for. Another thing that you can do, other than having to buy, or if you don't have a humidifier and you do have the plant and you want to be able to raise the humidity, what you can do is you can actually get all your humidity loving plants and you can group them together, and that will naturally raise the humidity around the plants for you in a more natural way, sort of like creating its own little ecosystem, if you like. Another thing you can do is you can mist them on a regular basis. That raises the humidity. Other than that, what you can do, if you've got it in a pot and you've got a saucer on the bottom, or a drip tray on the bottom, and fill the drip tray with pebbles and sit the pot on top of the pebbles and half fill that drip tray with water, and that water will naturally evaporate around the plant, raising the humidity in a more natural way around the plant. Another thing you can do is you can cover the top of your pot with shells, so when you're actually watering the plant, those shells will collect little reservoirs of water, which in effect will act as little reservoirs, and over a period of time raise the humidity and help to assist with keeping that humidity as high as possible. And it will be localized to the plant, which is also very useful, just in case you don't have tons of humidity loving plants, or ones that specifically require it for any particular reason. Another thing I suppose you can do as well is you can get little water vessels, so little ramekin dishes or little bottles, and you can place them around your plants, and the water will evaporate naturally. So in particular, if you're grouping plants together, just to give that extra humidity, put a couple of bowls of water in there or bottles of water and just let that evaporate naturally. That will raise that humidity even more for you. I think I've pretty much covered everything about humidity there. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to fertilizer. Now, the Ludisia discolor is not a plant that requires huge amounts of fertilizer. So you can actually get away with fertilizing this maybe 3 times a year. And if that's how much you end up fertilizing it, it will generally be happy enough and carry on living quite happily in that situation. However, that doesn't mean that you can't create a more stable fertilizing regime. So for instance, during the growing season, you might have a collection of plants and you might decide that you're going to fertilize your plants every week, or not every week, sorry, every 2 weeks to every month, however often you decide to fertilize them. If that is the case, then this can be added to that regime, but what I would suggest is that you make sure that you put a very diluted nutrient rate into the Ludisia. So as an example, if your manufacturer is recommending 10 mil per litre of water, I don't think that any manufacturers actually recommend that, but it's just an example. If they're saying 10 mil per litre of water, I would suggest to you to put maybe 1.5 to 2 mils per litre of water, so less than a quarter, and maybe fertilize every second and third watering. So alternate it, so just making sure that you're watering it once or twice with just plain filtered or whichever water you're choosing to water it with, just to make sure that if there is any excess nutrient in there, you're able to dilute that into the potting medium or able to flush it out through any excess water that comes out of the bottom of the pot, just to make sure that there's not a build-up in there. Now, as far as the type of fertilizer goes that the Ludisia actually likes, it would be fine with orchid fertilizers. You can use an orchid fertilizer, but if you happen to have this plant and you don't have other orchids, then you'd be fine to use a general house plant fertilizer as well. It will take quite happily to that too. So there's no specific requirements as far as which fertilizer to actually use for this plant. So as far as fertilizer goes, I suppose generally it's more up to you, up to your budget, up to your preference. You can pretty much choose to do as you wish with the fertilizer. I mean, if you've got your general houseplant fertilizer at home, there's no need to run out and look for something specific to the plant. You can use that. Just make sure you dilute it well, and that will work pretty good for the plant. As far as temperature goes, we're going to talk very briefly about temperature, because it's just a set of numbers, and I'm going to keep it brief because there's no excessive description to it. So the Ludisia likes temperatures between an absolute maximum of about 29 degrees down to an absolute minimum of 10 degrees. For optimal growth, you want to keep it between 23 and 26 degrees at its height, and in the evening for it to drop down to 13 degrees, which would be ideal for the plant. Obviously I mentioned 29 degrees. If you are getting temperatures up to that, then just monitor it, make sure that the plant's not in that environment for excessive periods of time, and also 10 degrees, making sure that it's not dropping below that or staying at that sort of temperature for extended periods, just to make sure that those temperatures won't kill your plant, don't get me wrong. All they will do is they will stress the plant out, which we all want our plants to grow. We don't want them to stay looking the same forever. We get plants to add to our collection and hope that they flourish, and the ideal growing conditions would fit in there for it to flourish and do well in your home. So that is your general temperature degrees that you can work within. So next we're going to talk about propagation. Again, it's going to be very briefly. Now, I would imagine the most common time that you're actually going to propagate this plant is during repotting. Generally, what you're going to do is you're going to repot about once a year with this plant because it produces a rhizome rooting system. Rather than the roots focusing on going downwards, they've got more of a tendency to spread out. And from the rhizome roots, it actually develops new shoots, which eventually end up filling the top of your pot. So on average, I would imagine you're probably going to need to repot this once a year. And when you're actually repotting this plant, because the plant itself is quite brittle, when you're actually taking it out of the pot, I've read quite a lot of people have said the same thing, that when you're taking it out, you break stems. And it's happened to quite a few people whose reviews of their plants that I've read. And basically, all you have to do is dig a little hole into the soil, take the piece that's either broken off unintentionally or that you've propagated intentionally, stick it in the soil, pack it in so that it doesn't have a way to move around, and just leave it. And after a couple of months, it will have established a new root system, and they propagate very, very easily apparently. So generally, from my understanding, is the time that you're going to find that they're going to break is when you're actually trying to repot them. So just keep that in mind. I think that's everything about propagation there. So finally, before I close the video, I just want to give a note on the type of pots that are a preferred type of pot for this kind of orchid. Now, generally people keep their plants in, you know, your narrow, deep pots, like for instance what this is in here. I will give a bit more explanation as to why my particular Ludisia is in that pot in a second, but they prefer to be in a shallow, wide pot, so like what you would plant bulbs into, so quite shallow and quite wide. And what that will do is it will give the rhizome space to spread out, and also it takes away the temptation to bury that rhizome quite deep into the soil as well, because the closer it is to the surface, the more readily it's going to be able to put new shoots out, and it won't generally branch off of the plant. It will produce other branches off of the branches that it's growing, but most of the growth will come from the rhizome producing new shoots. So giving it a wide, shallow bowl will ensure that, you know, it's got plenty of growth space throughout the forthcoming year to year and a half, however it is, however long it is until it needs to be repotted again. I think I've pretty much covered everything now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk briefly about my Ludisia before I end the video. So I actually purchased this for myself, for my own collection, because I've got a few jewel orchids now in my collection. I keep them in my terrarium bottle, which is behind me. And I saw these and I thought, you know what, I would like to add one to my collection. They're very beautiful. I would think I would really enjoy adding another jewel orchid in. So I purchased this with one of my orders that came in quite some months ago, but unfortunately when it arrived, all its roots had died. It had no living leaves on it. It was basically on the brink of death, and I was a bit disappointed because out of the whole order, I think I had about 40 plants come in that order, and this was the only plant I'd actually ordered for myself. Most of the rest of the plants that were ordered were for customers or things that I was going to put up for sale. So when it turned up, I was a little bit disheartened, but I have a tendency to think if there is green, that is a clear indication of a will to live. So I got to work on it. I stuck it in a Ziploc bag with sphagnum moss. I stuck it under a light, indirectly obviously, and I left it there for a few months. First thing I started to notice was it started to produce new roots. Now, remembering that when it arrived, all the roots had totally died off. There were no roots whatsoever left alive on it. It literally was just a stem with no leaves. All from here onwards, this is all new growth. The only growth that is its original growth is below this node here in the pot. And it's the same with this one, and I've got a third shoot in here with some new growth coming out as well. All of these were just stems, so I left them for a few months. I noticed it started rooting. Once the roots had established enough, the only thing I changed was I took it out of the Ziploc bag. I left it in the sphagnum moss that I started rooting it in, and I just transplanted it into a bowl, into a pot rather, and it's stayed there pretty much ever since. So I'm probably going to wait until maybe towards mid to end of summer before I actually go to repot this myself. But I'm actually so pleased with the fact that I was actually able to save it, and it's rewarding me by going into flowering at the moment as well, which I've absolutely loved. You know, they're not, as I mentioned earlier, typically renowned for their flower production, but I thought they were so pretty. I'm going to see if I can get that a bit closer to the camera so that you can see. I don't know how clear that's going to be because the flower spike is quite wobbly on there, and it is coming towards the end of flowering now as well. It's been flowering for over a month, I think, around about. It started flowering for me around about in late December time. Well, it had its flower bud and then the flowers started opening up. So that is my account of keeping a Ludisia. I was a little bit put off trying to order another one at that stage. I thought, let me just see how I get on with this, and I seem to have done all right. I will give it another go in the future because I do want to have substantially more than this in a pot. I mean, I've got 3 stems here, and I know that the rhizomes will start producing, but you know, that's going to take a year or so to get to anything substantial, and I do want a little bit more than that. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed my video today. The reason I chose to do the Ludisia Discolor is due to a vote I put up on my Instagram account. I generally put up votes about every 2 weeks at the moment. Sometimes I try to make it a weekly event, but with a family at home and work and a busy life schedule, I do try my best to make sure that I upload them as frequently as possible. And I'm sorry that I haven't been uploading on a weekly basis, but I have tried to keep it to at least every 2 weeks. So like I was saying, the reason that I uploaded this video was due to a vote I put up on Instagram. I put up for the Ludisia Discolor, I put up for a Q&A, I put up the Golden Pothos, and there was another plant which unfortunately I can't remember right now, but the Ludisia Discolor won by quite a significant margin. I'd put it in my previous vote as well, and it got quite a lot of votes in there, which is why I decided to put it back in the vote again, because I know that a lot of people are actually, due to the votes, waiting to get the opportunity for this video to come out. So thank you to all of my followers on Instagram for voting for the video, whether your vote won or not. I thank you for participating in the vote. I really appreciate the support you all show me. If you're new to my YouTube channel, then just to let you know, my Instagram account is also called Plants and Paint, so feel free to pop over to there, have a look at my account. I give regular pictures of my plants on there. You can find a lot of information about the things that I do, like for instance, I sell plants for a living as well as collect them, and you get more regular updates on Instagram than you actually will do through my YouTube account at present. Although saying that, as I mentioned quite recently on my Instagram, I am currently in the process of setting up another side of my plant keeping hobby, and that is not only for myself to just give a little extra dimension to my hobby, but it's an opportunity for me to create extra content that is a little bit different from just doing care and maintenance videos, something a bit more personal, something where I will learn at the same time you are learning with me, which I think is going to be great fun. I'm really actually looking forward to that. So As I was saying, thank you everybody again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed my video today. If you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and please leave a comment down below. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon so that you can get notifications of future content that I'm due to release. And I look forward to seeing you all soon in my future videos. My name's Zahir, this is Plants and Paints, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.